Hi guys, Joe Ward here, and in 2026, cash is definitely trash again. In today's video, we're going to talk through the emergency fund and its importance, what is cash, and then taxes and inflation, which is really the issue right now. And then we're going to hit on a few solutions that you might want to think through for yourself. First and foremost, the emergency fund, it's really important, right? We want to have some liquidity just in case anything happens. Now, we do have credit cards and things like that to bridge the gap, but I do think it is nice to have a few months of expenses on hand in some sort of savings account. And really, to start, you have to know what your expenses are. So I recommend Monarch just for budgeting and tracking what those expenses might be. Next is, how much do we really want to have? Do we want to have 3 months or 6 months? And I don't generally recommend any more than 6, but for people that do want more than 6 months, I think this video is really important because it's going to show you the negative real returns that cash has right now and some other options for that cash position. Now let's talk about cash and what is it, because there's a lot of different types of cash out there. There's the physical cash that we all think about that you might put under your mattress, although I think there are certainly some risks to that. There's bank accounts, which are incredibly useful, obviously, for day-to-day checking. And then there's bank savings accounts, which are honestly terrible for the most part. In terms of inflation in your bank account, you have cash coming in and then going out to match up with your expenses. So there's very little risk of inflation deteriorating away that day-to-day cash because it's so quickly coming in and going out. But all of the excess, we want to think about other types of vehicles to place that in. And that's really where the high yield savings account comes into play. And a lot of people know about these, right? There are a lot of different providers that we have here on the screen, and some people like to figure out the best one and move their money every few months to get the highest yield. I think those are great, and they're certainly way better than bank savings accounts. But even today, they may not be the best tool out there. So we also want to talk about some other different products and tools. You've got CDs, certificates of deposit. These used to be incredibly prevalent. I don't necessarily recommend them, particularly not for an emergency fund, because in my opinion, an emergency fund is something that we do want to have access to. And you really don't have access to a CD unless you want to forfeit that interest. There's just better tools out there. Next are money market accounts. So that's a banking deposit. Here's Ally Bank. They have both the high yield savings account and the money market account, but they're not necessarily pushing you towards one or the other from an interest rate perspective. I don't really see much of a need for money market accounts at banking institutions. I think the ones that you can get in the security form from Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, whoever it may be, are going to be a little bit better. And we'll talk more about that. And then last are marketable securities. So with your excess funds, you could put them in stocks, bonds, and other tools. And that may or may not be right for you. And it really depends on your situation. When we're talking about the emergency fund, we'll really stick to high yield savings and money market funds. If you want to take, again, more than 6 months and put it into an emergency fund, then we might start talking about some short-term, high credit fixed income, but I'll leave that for another video. Next, we want to understand the tax system because this is incredibly important. Interest income that you get is taxed at your ordinary income rate, so the rate that you're paying on your wages. Marginal tax being anywhere from 10 to 37%. Some of my clients have to deal with the state taxes too. And then net investment income as well. And I'm not going to go too far into net investment income, but by and large, if you're in the 32% plus bracket, you're going to also face this 3.8% net investment income that's going to be assessed most likely to your interest income. And so with all of that, you can see how you can pretty quickly get to a 50% tax on interest-bearing accounts, which is obviously not ideal. Last is inflation. Inflation's the silent killer. The Fed actually did a really good job keeping under their 2% target for a long time. A lot of us didn't really feel it or know a whole lot about inflation, but obviously there was this huge peak at 9.1% back in 2022, and it's tapered off, but last year's inflation was 2.7%, and this year's not really looking that much better. A lot of the forecasts are saying somewhere again in that 2.7 to 2.9% range, but you never know. There's a lot of things at play. So we're just going to have to wait and find out. But I do think that's a good barometer when you're making these decisions. So let's put all this together, and you can probably already see the problem, but we're going to walk through it and then some potential solutions as well. First and foremost, The truth about cash is that you might be getting this great 3.65% yield, but after all the taxes we talked about, the money in your pocket is really closer to 2%. And then with inflation at 2.5%, 3%, you can see that your real return after these items is negative. Your cash is losing purchasing power year over year. That's really the point of this whole video. You don't want to keep too much cash on hand, knowing that in today's environment, you are probably losing even if you optimize. Let's talk about some potential optimizations that you might want to think through. Next, we're going to talk about money market funds. This is an excerpt from Vanguard. Money market funds are a type of mutual fund. They invest in cash-like equivalents, short-term, high maturity bonds. And so they're generally doing a really good job at never losing their principal. So they're thought of as being relatively safe. But how do you pick the right one? There are multiple different kinds: taxable, treasury, which precludes you from state and local taxes, munis, which don't have federal taxes. So how do we pick the right one? You've got to calculate either the tax equivalent yield so that you can compare it on an after-tax basis to other types of investments, or you can do what I like to do, which is a lot more simple, and just calculate what is the true after-tax yield and see if that's above or below your inflation expectations. Let's talk through a couple examples. We're going to use a couple here with an assumed 35% marginal tax bracket, 3.8% net investment income tax, and then a 4.5% state tax as well. You can see on the taxable side, the equivalent yield is the same because there's no tax benefits here. Then when you look at the treasury, you're not having to pay the state taxes. So even though the nominal yield's 3.98%, since you're getting the benefit of not paying the 4.5% state tax, the tax equivalent yield then is 4.17. It would be better than the taxable money market fund. And then you can see the muni is even better than the two of those because then you're avoiding the 35% marginal rate and the 3.8% net investment income tax. And while its nominal yield is almost 1% lower, not having to pay the 40-ish% in taxes makes the tax equivalent yield a lot better. Okay, if we go on to December, these numbers change, but munis are in the lead again, so we would want to stick to that. And then we look at January where things change dramatically. Muni funds are no longer the best. They're actually the worst because their yield has gone down substantially. This is just something that happens in the muni environment. At the end of the year, there's a lot of inflows of cash for various reasons that I won't get into. And these funds have to do something with it. And so they don't get as good of yield. And you can actually see this if you look at the charts that every few months, there's some cyclicality and seasonality to the muni market. You'd want to actually be managing this on an active basis to get the best juice for the squeeze. So that's the tax equivalent yield. But I also want to show you guys the other side, which is really just the after-tax yield. And I think this is a lot easier to view. And you can just see here that in January, the Treasury fund was the best, and you're getting 2.24% interest. But in real terms, after inflation, you're still losing. So in conclusion, we want to keep the emergency fund down to a minimum. This isn't something that we're trying to get a whole lot of yield out of, obviously, but I do see people that have hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars in these high yield savings accounts. We really want to develop a plan based on your scenario, and you have to take everything into consideration, your taxes being the biggest one, inflation and your expectations. Then how active do you want to be? Do you want to do this on your own? Do you want to set it and forget it? Do you want to hire someone to do it for you? All of these things are to be taken into account. And then maybe the secondary piece is you might just want to invest these excess funds. So you may want to have a smaller emergency fund, but then you might want to have some short-term reserves that are invested in high quality, short-term debt obligations, fixed income bonds. I hope that helps. I know this is a lot, but I do see this being a pretty big issue with a lot of my clients who are getting these negative after tax, after inflation returns. And a lot of times it's without even knowing it. Cash just starts to compile. You have bonuses and RSUs. And when you don't have a plan, it's really easy to just accumulate too much cash on hand. But there are better options out there, just depending on if you want the trade-offs of having to do it or pay for those services. And my personal view is that there's probably at least another rate cut coming. If Jay Powell's replaced, there might be some more pressure on rate cuts into the future. That means the savings rates and interest rates are going to go down. It could mean that inflation goes up, making these real rates of return even worse. So I'd position yourself now in 2026 to really have a solution for this, because I don't think this is going to change in the short term. All right, guys, thanks so much. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out. This is only for educational purposes and should not be taken as tax, legal, or investment advice. And these numbers are definitely going to change as we go forward. But if you ever want specific guidance for your situation, I give all prospective clients a complimentary review assessment where we'll look at your situation and see if I might be able to help.